Ever since the great Leonhard Euler set up shop here in the 18th century, the city has been famous for its mathematics and mathematicians. Here in the Steklov Institute, some of the world's brightest mathematicians have set out their theorems and conjectures. This morning, one of them is giving a rare seminar. It's tough going, even if you speak Russian, which unfortunately I don't. But we get a break in the middle to recover before the final hour.
There's a kind of rule in seminars that the first third is for everyone, the second third is for the experts, and the last third is just for the lecturer. So I think that's what we're going to get next.
The lecturer is Yuri Matyasevich, and he's explaining his latest work on, what else? The Riemann hypothesis. As a bright young graduate student in 1965, Yuri's tutor suggested he have a go at another Hilbert problem, the one that had in fact preoccupied Julia Robinson, Hilbert's 10th. It was the height of the Cold War. Perhaps Matyasevich could succeed for Russia, where Julia and her fellow American mathematicians had failed.
At first I did not like the approach.
All right.
The statement looked to me rather strange, artificial, but after some time I understood that it is quite natural, and then I understood that she had a new brilliant idea, and I just started to further develop in it.
And in January 1970, he found the vital last piece in the jigsaw. He saw how to capture the famous Fibonacci sequence of numbers, using the equations that were at the heart of Hilbert's problem. Building on the work of Julia and her colleagues, he'd solved the 10th. He was just 22 years old. The first person he wanted to tell was the woman he owed so much to.
And I got no answer.
Huh.
And I believed they were lost in the mail. It was quite natural because it was Soviet time.
But back in California, Julia had heard rumours through the mathematical grapevine that the problem had been solved. And she contacted Yuri herself.
She said, I just had to wait for you to grow up to get the answer, because she had started work in 1948.
Well, Yuri was just a baby.
And then he responds by thanking her and saying that the credit is as much hers as it is his.
I met Julia 1 year later. It was in Bucharest, and I suggested that after the Congress in Bucharest, Julia and her husband Raphael came to see me here in Leningrad.
Together, Julia and Yuri worked on several other mathematical problems, until shortly before Julia died in 1985. She was just 55 years old.
She was able to find new ways. Many mathematicians just combined previously known methods to solve new problems, and she had really new ideas.
Although Julia Robinson showed that there was no universal method to solve all equations in whole numbers, mathematicians were still interested in finding methods to solve special classes of equations. It would be in France in the early 19th century, in one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of mathematics, that methods were developed to understand why certain equations could be solved while others couldn't. It's early morning in Paris on the 29th of May 1832. Every Galois is about to fight for his very life. It's the reign of the reactionary Bourbon king Charles X. And Galois, like many angry young men in Paris then, is a republican revolutionary. Unlike the rest of his comrades, though, he has another passion: mathematics. He'd just spent 4 months in jail. Then, in a mysterious saga of unrequited love, he's challenged to a duel. He'd been up the whole previous night, refining a new language for mathematics he'd developed. Galois believed that mathematics shouldn't be the study of number and shape, but the study of structure. Perhaps he was still preoccupied with his maths. There was only one shot fired that morning. Galois died the next day, just 20 years old. It was one of mathematics' greatest losses. Only by the beginning of the 20th century would Galois be fully appreciated and his ideas fully realised. Galois had discovered new techniques to be able to tell whether certain equations could have solutions or not. The symmetry of certain geometric objects seemed to be the key. His idea of using geometry to analyse equations would be picked up in the 1920s by another Parisian mathematician, André Weil.
I was very much interested and, so far as school was concerned, quite successful in all possible branches.
And he was. After studying in Germany as well as France, André settled down at this apartment in Paris, which he shared with his more famous sister, the writer Simone Weil. But when the Second World War broke out, he found himself in very different circumstances.
He dodged the draft by fleeing to Finland, where he was almost executed for being a Russian spy. On his return to France, he was put in prison in Rouen to await trial for desertion. At the trial, the judge gave him a choice: 5 more years in prison or serve in a combat unit. He chose to join the French army, a lucky choice, because just before the Germans invaded a few months later, all the prisoners were killed.
Weil only spent a few months in prison, but this time was crucial for his mathematics, because here he built on the ideas of Galois and first developed algebraic geometry, a whole new language for understanding solutions to equations. Galois had shown how new mathematical structures could be used to reveal the secrets behind equations. Weil's work led him to theorems that connected number theory, algebra, geometry and topology, and are one of the greatest achievements of modern mathematics. And without André Weil, we would never have heard of the strangest man in the history of maths, Nicolas Bourbaki. There are no photos of Bourbaki in existence, but we do know that he was born in this cafe in the Latin Quarter in 1934, when it was a proper cafe, the Café Coupelard, and not the fast food joint it's now become. Just down the road, I met up with Bourbaki expert David Orban.
I must say, actually, when I was a graduate student, I got quite frightened when I used to go into the library, because this guy, Bourbaki, had written so many books.
Something like 30 or 40 altogether. In analysis, in geometry, in topology, it was all new foundation.
Virtually everyone studying maths seriously anywhere in the world in the 1950s, 60s and 70s would have read Nicolas Bourbaki.
And he also applied for membership of the American Math Society, I heard. But
At which point he was denied membership.
Really?
On the ground that he didn't exist.
Oh.
The Americans were right. Nicolas Bourbaki does not exist at all, and never has. Bourbaki is in fact the nom de plume for a group of French mathematicians led by André Weil, who decided to write a coherent account of the mathematics of the 20th century. Most of the time, mathematicians like to have their own names on theorems. But for the Bourbaki group, the aims of the project overrode any desire for personal glory. After the Second World War, the Bourbaki baton was handed down to the next generation of French mathematicians, and their most brilliant member was Alexander Grothendieck. Here at the IHES in Paris, the French equivalent of Princeton's Institute for Advanced Study, Grothendieck held court at his famous seminars in the 1950s and 1960s.
He had this incredible charisma, and he had this amazing ability to see a young person and somehow know what kind of contribution this person can make to this incredible vision he had of how mathematics, so to speak, could be.
And this vision enabled him to get across some very difficult ideas indeed.
He says, suppose you want to open a walnut. So the standard thing is you take a nutcracker and you just break it open. And he says his approach is more like you take this walnut and you put it out in the snow and you leave it there for a few months. And then when you come back to it, it just opens.
Grothendieck is a structuralist. What he's interested in are the hidden structures underneath all mathematics. Only when you get down to the very basic architecture and think in very general terms will the patterns in mathematics